What if they gave a Star War and nobody came? Let's talk about The Mandalorian and Grogu.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to discuss Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to give the people something that they should probably check out this week?
So this is not the warmest recommendation. This is not some hidden gem I found or something, but I checked out season 37 of The Simpsons. Now, I grew up on The Simpsons, specifically on the golden seasons. Some people put the cutoff at season 10, some people put the cutoff at season 12. But like that was generally the time when The Simpsons was a masterpiece. And it's kind of been on live support for the last 10 plus years. Every few years, I kind of check it out to see if it has gotten good again. And usually it doesn't, but I kind of had a good time with season 37. It's not the most amazing either comedy or season of The Simpsons or anything like that. It's more like it's okay. It seems like they kind of climbed their way out of some of the depths they were in the last couple of years, where everything was very safe and very bland and purely based on callbacks and references and all of that. And they seem to be having actual stories again, which is nice. So I didn't hate it, and I kind of watched through the season and I was fine with it. Right, so that's my glowing recommendation.
I forget that shows like that are still going on. I actually know people that are actually like really massive Simpson fans for whatever reason, but interesting. I didn't know that's still going on. Not that I was ever like the biggest Simpsons fans anyway. I thought it was cool at the time, but I don't know. I think I kind of like outgrew it.
I still think the early seasons are masterful, but like a lot of these animated sitcoms have kind of really lost like what made them good in the first place. I think Family Guy is kind of the same way, and they kind of run on just inertia and people just being used to them. I don't find that very interesting. I'm not going to watch something just because I've always watched it. But I think currently it is a bit better than it used to be. And I was a little bit surprised by that because nobody talks about that show in a positive way at all. So that's why I wanted to mention it.
I don't hear it come up in many conversations at all, to be honest. But outside of like maybe one or two people. But no, fair. On my side, I watched the finale of The Boys season 5. Or the finale of the show in general, actually. I think I've kind of concluded that it's actually quite difficult to stick the landing, to kind of like, know how and when to sort of give a satisfying ending to a show that's been kind of praised and loved. And I think, kind of credit to them that they didn't drag out for more seasons than they needed to. I think they like, kind of kept it at 5, which I think is a respectable length of time. I think the finale, like the last episode specifically, was you kind of got what you expected in terms of sort of characters and their conclusions and sort of seeing the end of their story and how it plays out. It's nothing remarkable, but I think it's difficult to really know how to like stick the landing on some of these shows. And I think you get satisfying payoff with Homelander, you get satisfying payoff with Butch and the gang, and kind of everyone kind of goes off and is left in a good place, basically. So I don't know. I'm happy with it. I saw some people were unhappy with it. I think what more did you want them to do with the show is kind of what I say to them.
You're probably the first person who said positive things about it. Like that I've heard. Like the discourse on the internet seems to be pretty negative about where they didn't like where they took Homelander and just the story in general. And yeah, you're basically saying it basically delivered on what the show promised in the beginning.
I think it delivered in a sense of the kind of like conflict was always, Butch wanting to get Homelander, and they spent many seasons kind of chasing him. And of course, when you have like the same villain over and over again from one season to the next, I think it's people are writing that the show kind of maybe like went a little bit wayward in like maybe like season 4 and stuff like that. But I think for where it went and kind of how it developed, I think it was going in a bad direction. I don't even think season 5 is like all that remarkable as a whole, but I think it kind of knew that it was running its course and it decided to end it. And I think it ended it on a fine note. Like I don't know what people wanted from Homeland, and I've seen people like complain about like power scaling and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, I get it, but like I get it if you want to like really be pedantic about like that type of stuff. But I think they just kind of had to end the story eventually, and they did it in a decent enough way.
Yeah, I dropped out of The Boys, I think, early season 2 because it kind of was just going in a way that I didn't really enjoy, and like the brand of satire and commentary that they did was not really my thing. But I guess people who like the show now have a complete story. Like it actually ends the story, is what you're saying, right? Like it's not a cliffhanger, it's not just cancelled. This is the ending the showrunners intended.
Yeah, it's the ending. Butcher's story is concluded. Homelander's story is concluded. You could say like a few obviously like a few characters are still alive and out there, but you know they've kind of gone off, and they give them like the end of season montage of like where everyone's at that is kind of still around. So the gang came together, they did battle, they kind of overcame, and they all kind of ended up where they ended up without doing spoilers.
And I guess that's a little bit commendable by itself because so many shows just don't have endings at all, where they kind of just go on and on until they're cancelled. So good on the boys for actually ending it at the right moment, I guess.
Yeah, at season 5, because again, it's like a very popular show, and they could have quite easily tried to like milk it a little bit more. What I am annoyed at is that they cancelled Gen V, because I actually think Gen V was actually pretty good. I actually did quite like Gen V, but for the boys, I think 5 solid seasons. You'll have your like ups and downs through the 5 seasons, but I think as a whole, like you can't. If someone new was to like be like, oh, let me check out the boys for the first time, outside of all the hype and outside of all the all the stuff, I think they'd have 5 solid seasons of like good TV to watch on the most part.
Yeah, and I guess that's worth something. For some reason, streaming should have been all about that, and they should have spent the last 10 years building up a catalog of complete stories that you can just watch, and very few actually get there. So it's nice that there's one more like that. All right, shall we move on to the main attraction? Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu is a science fiction action movie that follows the story of the Mandalorian and his sidekick Grogu as they do various jobs in the form of bounties for the New Republic a couple of years after Episode 6. One of the jobs they do is to retrieve the kidnapped son of Jabba the Hutt from a group of cartel bosses who are politically useful to the New Republic. And as Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, uncovers all the context and the backstory to all of that, he comes to realize that this is not the whole story, and he then needs to save Rotta the Hutt from his captors. So, what did we think of Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu?
For me, it was like, what was the point in this? Really, really, truthfully, I think having waited so long for a new Star Wars movie, especially with how wrong it went the last trilogy that they tried to do, and you kind of lead with Mandalorian and Grogu, you're kind of like already like shooting yourself in the foot with it being a TV show that you're trying to adapt into the big screen. And for me, it just kind of didn't give me any feels at all for anything that was going on. Cool action sequences here and there, but in terms of like the characters and the connections that they had, etc., I kind of just didn't feel anything. And like at no point did I feel connected to the Mandalorian or Grogu, which is a big shame, because you have like this almost like father-child like relationship between like Mandalorian and Grogu, and like how they kind of like take care of each other, and you have like one that's gonna vastly outlive the other, and you can kind of like imagine like how you can put some like interesting like themes and stuff like in there. But I don't know, I didn't walk away with anything kind of profound from that. It also kind of felt like it ran too long at certain points. It almost felt like there was like a few points where it could have ended, but then the story kind of kept continuing, and I checked my time and I was like, oh, we probably have like another like half an hour of this movie kind of going on. There's like a particular part where it's more focused on Grogu, and I don't know, some people online seem to have found it sweet. I was a bit like, I don't know, I'm not cringing at it, but I think I was just kind of fed up at that point of the movie that I was like, I don't care like about this kind of like thing that you're trying to do, and there's not even like a kind of satisfying moment at the end of it either. It just kind of felt like we were just kind of going from one thing to the next, and it didn't really feel like there was like a strong cohesive story being told here, really truthfully. So what was the point, really, is my feeling towards it.
I wasn't disappointed by this, but that's mostly because I didn't expect anything. But I think our main takeaways are pretty much the same. Like, this looks fine. Like if you just turn the sound off, or if you walk into the movie like in the middle of an action sequence, it looks kind of okay. It looks Star Warsy. Like, the quality is kind of there, but there's nothing else going on. There's no story. There's no character. There's no themes. The movie tries to convince you that it's about a whole bunch of different things, but it doesn't actually tell a story about those things. The action sequences are very phoned in, where with like 2 or 3 exceptions, the action sequences are as basic as it gets, which in a long action-packed movie that basically goes from one set piece to the next, that's not excusable at all. The Mandalorian is awful in this. Like, he just sleepwalks through the entire plot. He has no personality. He barely says anything with any kind of emotion. He just stumbles through the plot and from one action sequence to the next. There's just nothing going on here. Like, and I think even calling it like 4 episodes of the TV shows strung together is already charitable, because in each of those episodes you could have a story where something was going on and there isn't really. It's just empty. They think a plot is just the movie, right? Where if you just list all the things that happen in a movie, that's the plot. But a movie needs more than this. A movie needs a story, and it needs to be about something, even in like the most basic way. It needs some kind of thematic underpinning so that you care about it. And because there's nothing here, there's nothing to care about. And so I kind of just yawned my way through a Star Wars movie with pretty looking action. And I was glad when I was done. And I didn't even have that experience with any of the other Star Wars movies, even the ones that I hated. And this is just a big pile of nothing. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, where do you want to start with this?
Yeah, so where do we start?
Maybe the action, because I think that was probably some of the best, and then like you said, like at the part, like some of the most kind of like phoned in parts of the movie, because the opening where like he's taking on the AT-ATs, and he's kind of like going through that whole like thing, and he's like using his jetpack and stuff like that. I think that's all like cool, and I actually thought that was like a really good opening to the movie, and you kind of like see him like really using his full arsenal of weaponry that he has. And I kind of like appreciated that he was just kind of like just using everything in his toolbox to kind of get the job done. And then you kind of have like the cool moment where again he's a bounty hunter, and it like really shows in that scene where the guy's like trying to get away, and then there's like bombs that are about to go off in the background, but he has to make sure that he gets his target. So, he's like very cool in the moment, gets a shot, and then like gets out at the last minute. I thought that was like a really good opening to the movie. And then I don't know, like outside of that, I can't think of like any other like action points in the movie where I was like, oh, like this is really cool. I did like the design of like that big sort of kind of like pink snake that was in the Hutt's pit that he had to like take on, and I kind of like how like ferocious and vicious that was. But I don't know, like what was your kind of takeaway from the action, because you kind of said it was like phoned in.
I do think it is phoned in, and that is because there's very little in there where it's actually like there's anything new going on. So one of the things about Star Wars is that it takes you to new places, and it shows you new things, new landscapes, new monsters, new enemies, new vehicles, everything, right? And everything in this is old. Maybe like if somebody's really deep into Star Wars lore and expanded universe and whatever, they can point to, okay, this is a reference and this is new and whatever. But on balance, he fights stormtroopers in AT-ATs, and he fights gray alien things, most of which come from something we know, right? So like one of the things I've seen in other reviews is in that big arena scene where he and Rotta fight like 8 monsters at a time. Apparently, those are the creatures from Chewbacca's chess set. Remember that? Like it's kind of like a version of, he plays kind of a version of chess with the C-3PO, and it's basically you move the monsters around and they fight and whatever. And apparently those were the monsters from that chess set, which I guess is a neat reference. Not that it means anything, but if you like recognizing things, you'll do that in this movie. But it's just old things. Like we're not going to new places. Like none of the enemies are new. None of the landscapes are very basic. We've got a beach. We've got snowy mountains. We've got islands. We've got a cyberpunk city. Nahata, the swamp city, was probably the most interesting one. But I know you asked about action sequences, but I'm getting there, right? It's just like everything is recycled old stuff, is what I'm saying. And that includes like the vehicles and the monsters and the weapons and all of that, right? So every single piece in this is something you've seen before. And there was nothing where I said, oh, like the prequels at least took you to cool looking places, even if it was just one shot or just one scene. But it gave this idea that the galaxy is a big place and a wondrous place, and if you jump to another planet, anything could be there. And no, like it's just snow or just sand, or it's you know what I mean? Like it's like that's kind of the big problem with this, and that extends into the action scenes where it's just like he fights some AT-ATs and he fights them exactly the way you think they would, and there's a bunch of blaster fights and there's a bunch of car chases, and it's all the most basic stuff you've ever seen. None of it has anything to do with the plot. None of it has anything to do with the Mandalorian or how he fights. Like you could have had almost exactly the same action sequences if the main character was a Republic trooper or a Jedi or something. Like little details would have been different, but fundamentally the story would unfold exactly the same way. There's nothing specific about the action scenes, and that is kind of one of the big problems with it. And they just got boring after a while because the Mandalorian will just walk into an action scene, start blasting people, and then maybe he will break out his flamethrower, and then he wins. And that's every action scene in the movie.
The most ridiculous one was one of the final ones, or the final one when he just kind of goes kamikaze on the Hutt's kind of like palace, or the Hutt's kind of layer or whatever. And I think they mentioned in the movie as well about like how serious like the Hutt's take the security as well, and like how they have like, you know,
Yeah.
some of the best security, etc. And then it's just like one man on a suicide mission, basically. Like he's just like going straight in, his plane's being shot down, he just crashes in and just like takes everyone out. And I was just like, it's like, this is very, like, everything else I was kind of on board with, but this specific part you're being very unrealistic with what is going on, because he shouldn't have even made it even anywhere close to it. Like, he was kind of being shot out of the sky, but because of like plot armor, his plane could take all the damage and all the bullets in the world, whereas you see like in other scenes where an X-wing or whatever, which kind of gets shot a few times and it gets like blown up and gets taken out. And obviously he's in a bigger ship than that. But I just remember looking at that and I was like, you almost died the last time you was there, and you think you're gonna go by yourself and just take everyone out and rescue Radha, and like there was like no thought or no plan behind it whatsoever.
Yeah, you might think that a bounty hunter would have some kind of plan for how to infiltrate a Hutt fortress, and it would involve not fighting in most cases, because every fight could kill you, right? So wouldn't he try to get into the place undetected, or with some kind of distraction maneuver or something? Like you say, like he kind of just crashes into the place and then starts shooting people. And I think one of the big problems with it, like one of the reasons why it all feels so empty, is that every scene is shot like a video game fight. Every place is really empty. There's like a backdrop and there's a few enemies, and then he fights the enemies and then he moves to the next stage. That's how that progresses. And I've said this for a while now, that modern writers, especially the kind that writes for Disney and companies like this, seems to have learned storytelling from video games. And they seem to think that every medium works the same way, and that what works in a video game also works in a movie. And that is just not the case. Like in a movie, you have internal conflicts and you have stakes and you have consequences and you have like motifs and themes and all of that stuff. And that, like, the action should be exciting by itself, but it should also be motivated by all of those things. And that should feed back into who the character is and what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. It shouldn't be generic. It shouldn't be possible to swap out the main character with another person. And that's exactly what is the case here. And I think that is one of the reasons why it all feels so empty and so dead.
The best connection in the movie was between Radha and Grogu. How Radha treated him, you know, like fed him, and was like kind of like showed he was like non-threatening through his interactions with Grogu. I kind of get that, like, you know, Grogu would be like, no, we probably need to go and save him, but like you said, it's just not really well thought out, and not like, you know, there wasn't an idea as to like what they wanted to do. And also, if they wanted to kill Radha, why do they keep him alive for so long?
Who is they? The twins or
the twins? Yeah, the twins. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess they don't say it, but I can imagine an angle where there are still people who will remember what Jabba's rule was like, so they are more loyal to Jabba's line than they are to the twins. And so if they just outright kill Jabba's son, that might make them some enemies. I don't know. Like again, it's not in the movie, but you can imagine this.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
One other angle is that crime families tend to really value family, and if you get a reputation for killing your family for short-term gain, that makes an enemy of every other family member, right? And Radha is still family, and so they have to deal with him in some way. But he's inconvenient, and so they kind of want to lock him away. But they want to be able, they have to be able to say that when one of ours was kidnapped, we got him back, right? So that part kind of makes sense. Like, you don't have to, it's not a huge leap to make it make sense, but it's also not in the movie.
And yeah, that makes sense. Like I said, it's not a huge leap for it to kind of make sense, and I can kind of accept that sort of that argument for it.
And I wish they had fleshed out the Hutts more, as opposed to just like one or two scenes where they kind of just act in stereotypical ways. One of the things I have about Star Wars is that the new Star Wars, like everything since the Disney acquisition, has been very bland in terms of kind of the world building, to the point where most of them outright avoid it at all cost. And I think that creates a vacuum where it's very hard to motivate character arcs and conflicts. One of the big sins of the sequel trilogy is that they didn't do anything about that at all. They just had said, well, we have an empire and we have rebels and they fight, and that's your movie. But then there wasn't like a backdrop for why these groups existed and why they fought and what it meant for the galaxy and what it meant for people who live in that galaxy and so on. this kind of has kind of like the world building in this is very basic, but it's there, and it's saying kind of the Republic is much smaller than it used to be, and so it has to pick its fights because many systems didn't rejoin when they were refounded after the Empire, so they have to make a lot of compromises, and so they have to make allies that are maybe not very convenient, right? So they have to play nice with the Hutts, for instance. That fundamentally is an interesting setup for stories, where the New Republic are the good guys, but they are, for practical reasons, in a position where they have to make compromises that the old Republic would not have made, and that the heroes don't want to make. And if it was done properly, and if that is what all of this was actually about, you could have a really interesting setup for interesting stories about idealism and morality. And like, we kind of live in a world where a lot of alliances are very messy, right? Where the people we are allied with are not necessarily our friends, but that is a reality of the world. It's just what I'm saying. And bringing that into Star Wars and explaining it as, well, the New Republic is just weaker than the Old Republic, and so they have to make more compromises. And that is what that looks like. And this is how you can be a hero in a messy world and of shades of gray. Wouldn't that be interesting? And kind of the beginnings of that are here, but the movie doesn't bother. Like, I don't even know that the movie realizes that that's what they're doing, but if they had, they could have built a real story on this. Like, just the fact that our hero is a bounty hunter and a mercenary is already one step more interesting than just a Jedi who just does the right thing because that's what Jedi do. You know what I mean? Like, it's just such a massive wasted opportunity. And if the movie had focused on that more and fleshed things out more and showed us more about the New Republic and more about the Hutts and what the political, balance is and calculation, and we moved beyond just a few platitudes and actually told a story about this could have actually been something. This could have actually been the beginning of something interesting.
And that's my concern with Star Wars kind of moving forward, is with the change in kind of the head of, the studio and who's running Star Wars. You kind of now have the guy that is kind of known to have disliked Andor. And I feel like you get a lot of those elements in Andor in terms of like the complexity and the moralities. And, you have like the good guys, but the good guys are having to make some of the morally great decisions to kind of, continue with the greater good. But then you now have the new studio head who didn't like Andor at all and didn't think that Andor was Star Wars or whatever, but is kind of, part of the reason why we got things like Ashoka, which I didn't even bother with that one. But it's kind of part of the reason why we've got like some of those like, TV series that aren't, all that great. And that's not kind of like completely bash him, because I'm sure that he like, he's in that position for a particular reason. I don't know whether this movie falls under him or not. I know he's kind of maybe involved in the TV series, but it kind of doesn't really like...
He has 2 cameos. You're talking about Dave Filoni.
Dave Filoni, yeah. I actually didn't realize he had 2 cameos in this.
Yeah, so he's an X-Wing pilot. So he's in 2 shots. One of them is when the Mandalorian hands over the crime boss. There's it shows like he walks into the mess hall or whatever it is, and they show a bunch of reaction shots from TIE fighter pilots and from Republic people, and one of them is a guy in a cowboy hat, and that's Dave Filoni. And because he's kind of like wearing a cowboy hat is kind of his trademark. And then he's also one of the pilots who is part of the raid on the Hutt Palace. So they're small cameos, and they're whatever. But he's in there. He and Jon Favreau are in charge of this, and whatever happens is their fault. By the way, this is an opportunity to disprove all the people who have been saying we only dislike Kathleen Kennedy because she's a woman. No, I dislike Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni as well for the same reasons. So this is gonna be...
Are you saying that? As in, like, you dislike him for the
That's
same...
what I'm saying, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I can only speak for myself, and I dislike them for the same reasons, because they have bad story instincts. And it leads to Star Wars being what it has been for the last 10 years. So we'll see how that goes.
Sorry, so was Dave Filoni... Because I didn't kind of read, like, in terms of production, was he in charge of this movie? Like, is this not his, like, kind of, like, first project, or was he, like, heavily involved as Jon Favreau? I believe, like, Jon Favreau was, like, the Mandalorian guy. I don't like that he made cameos in it, because, I don't know, it's a bit too self-involved. I would rather you just kind of focus on doing the stories. If
you're Hitchcock, you get to do that, right? If you're Dave Filoni, maybe just stay in your office. But anyway, I don't even hate the guy that much. I'm just not impressed by his work. So directed by is Jon Favreau, and written by, produced by is all Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. So those 2 are in charge. With anything in a company, the buck stops with the boss, and they are the bosses. And that's why everything that happens is their fault or their accomplishment.
Great.
So the thing about, do you know the phrase Filoni baloney?
No, I'm not in the Star Wars kind of verse like that to know Star Wars and Filoni baloney.
So Filoni baloney is essentially over-reliance on fan service, callbacks, trappings, superficial references, that sort of thing. And especially Filoni likes to reuse his favorite characters. Like that is why Ahsoka is so big, because he had a good idea 20 years ago and he just keeps bringing her back regardless of whether or not it's a good idea or not, right? So he just has his favorite characters and his favorite tropes and trappings, and he keeps recycling them over and over. And that is kind of why a lot of the Star Wars that he's been in charge of is the way it is. And I think that is why this entire movie is just one giant callback fest, because it's just stuff he likes, like was just put into this movie for that reason, and not because it fits the story. That's one of the big, like, I don't want to just make this about the guy, right? But like that like his fingerprints are all over this, and it explains why this movie is the way it is.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, because I think kind of hearing that, I think it's very unfortunate that, you know, you can have like people kind of come in and ruin a franchise, but it doesn't fill me with much hope for anything else kind of coming up. And I think the only other thing that's in production at the moment is Starfleet Academy or something like that, or Starfighters or something.
There's a Starfighter movie coming out next year with Ryan, one of the Ryans is in this.
Ryan Gosling?
An X-Wing pilot. Ryan Gosling, yeah. That could be something or could be not, I don't know, but that's announced for next year.
And then kind of after that, I don't know, just like, it's really sad, because like Star Wars is so iconic to so many people, and like even when I looked around like the cinema, there was like so many like older sort of generation that were like in the cinema. Like, you know, one guy certainly looked like he was like in the 70s, etc. Like popped in by himself to come and watch the movie. So like, you know, this is still like really dear in people's hearts, and like have like very little faith that the future of Star Wars is going to be something that's going to bring everyone back on side and like, you know, really reunite people and like, you know, make people feel excited about any upcoming movies. So I don't know. It's just sad. It's just sad the kind of like direction that Star Wars is going in, and you'll get like a few odd gems in there. And again, like I said, I really like Rogue One. I really like Andor. Around that, there's too many like Ashokas and the Acolytes, etc. for such a big franchise.
So I actually was curious about whether or not people were looking forward to this. So I looked at Google Trends before I went into this movie. And if you go back like 20 years, every time a major Star Wars thing comes out, there's a big spike. And The Force Awakens is a huge spike. And then there was another spike around Last Jedi, and a smaller one for Rise of Skywalker, and then a smaller one for Season 1 of Mandalorian. They get smaller each time. And this time it was barely noticeable. This has made like $160 million already. But that's not that much for a Star Wars movie, like the first one in 7 years. Very few people are talking about it. Like there's very little organic conversation about this. Like 80-90% drop compared to Force Awakens. And I think that's very telling.
I would say there was more people in my Obsession movie viewing than there was for Star Wars.
I actually did check the bookings at my local theater, and primetime bookings were decently full in my theater. And I went like for a noon showing and that sort of thing. So there were not a lot of people there. But certainly in my theater, nobody reacted to anything. Nobody clapped, nobody gasped, nobody laughed. There's funny moments in this, or supposed to be, and nobody laughed, right? And I think it's indicative that Star Wars is genuinely over. Like, it really does not have any legs anymore. I've been worried about the future of Star Wars since The Last Jedi, basically. Like, as in, what will it take to turn this around? Or is this just the inevitable decline or whatever? Throughout the last 7+ years, every time a new Star Wars thing came out, there was like this hope that, okay, this is the one where they turn the corner. This is the one that will be different. This is the one that really captured people's imagination again. And this is, I think, the first one where I just said, nah, what did you expect? This is so empty and so tired and so rote that I don't know what anybody could get out of this. Like, honestly, unless you just like looking at Star Warsy things, there's nothing in this movie. Like the Mandalorian is even less interesting than Rey, and Rey is already not great. What is going on with this character? Why does he keep coming back? The armor looks like kind of cool, but that's about it. Just as a character, there's nothing to him. He does not have a story. He doesn't have a journey. He cannot carry a movie, much less several. Who's going to care about the Mandalorian? Like, there isn't even, like, it's not even that I dislike him. It's more like there isn't even anything to care about. Like, what are you going to latch on to? The armor? Or the fact that he wins fights? Or the fact that he's kind of a stoic badass? But that's it. Like, there's nothing else. Even the thing about taking off the helmet kind of was mentioned, but it's not his story. Like, why? Like, if you've seen the show, you kind of realize what context that has. That he's part of this fundamentalist cult that never takes off their helmets, and so somebody making him take off his helmet kind of creates like a blood feud kind of thing where he has to kill them. But that's not a sympathetic character trait. Like, that's not a hero. That's a fanatic. That's a zealot.
Yeah, it's interesting about the Mandalorian. We can kind of focus on him here. is before having seen, the TV show, and before kind of maybe having seen some of the prequels, etc., you kind of heard of like this like Mandalorian character who was like such like a cool figure, or like kind of like such a badass character. It just seems like with the limitations to kind of like the mythology of like the Mandalorians, and like you said about like not being able to take off the helmets and stuff like that, it just kind of seems like he can only come across as one toned, and there's like no ever, like you can't really ever get like any emotions out of him, or you can't really sort of kind of draw any kind of like moving performance out of the Mandalorian. Like you said, it's like for a TV series that's probably fine, because you can have like an ensemble of like supporting cast that can kind of like add to that, and you can also have that in the movie as well. But he was kind of like left to his own devices too often, and I feel like they probably could have like padded in some characters around him to kind of give the movie a little bit more life and a little bit more heart. If we're not going to give the story to the Mandalorian, if we're not going to give him anything to kind of really like strive for, like what was like his real like character motivation in this, like what was his like like his real drive in this particular movie, outside of kind of like wanting to do the right thing. And like you said about like someone's now seen your face and you have to kill everyone, that's not really something that you can kind of get behind, unless you just want the cool bad guy. But I think we're not in like the time of like just having like the cool action man, kind of running around and just like gunning people down. It's not kind of what people want. I think, having this movie just kind of really exposes the limitations of having the Mandalorian really be the key sort of person that you're trying to push.
Yeah, he's kind of a generically good and honorable guy, right? Like he takes on the job, so he wants to finish the job, and he wants to save Rotta because he's been kidnapped. And when he realizes that there's a scheme there to set up Rotta to die in this big final fight, because it makes his owner a whole bunch of money, and so he's against that and that sort of thing. Like that's fine, but that's not exactly a personality, right? That's just generic good guy behavior. And then I don't remember exactly what he said, but there was like he has kind of this interaction with Rotta where Rotta just fights because it's fun, and the Mandalorian fights because it's necessary, or some nonsense like that. And I don't feel like I don't even remember the exact details anymore, but it didn't feel like that informed or motivated the rest of his actions. Like, it seems to me like violence has always been his plan A, and he has zero problems killing other people in order to achieve his goals. So in what way is he kind of this enlightened warrior type who will only fight when it's necessary? And why is that his conflict with Rotta, and how does it inform the story? And I would say it doesn't.
I have nothing to defend the people who wrote this on that, because it's exactly how you said it.
And then we've got another pretend arc, which is his relationship with Grogu, right? First of all, it makes no sense at all that he's still in charge of Grogu, right? Like, if you watch the show, and I didn't quite finish it, like I did watch it at one point, and I tried to rewatch it for this, and I didn't quite make it to the end of the last season, which I think is season 3. And as of season 3, Grogu is assimilating into Mandalorian culture, and that is why he has this armor plate. And that is why Din Djarin is teaching him how to fight, even though he can't fight. Like, he's like 10 centimeters tall. Like, what is he gonna do? And he doesn't even use the Force that much, so he kind of just sits back and tries not to get hurt. And that's about it, right? So Grogu does nothing, is a non-character. He was kind of cute 10 years ago, or whenever season 1 came out. And he's not really developed into another character because he's not allowed to grow up, right? We cannot have a teenage Grogu ever, right? Because that would sell fewer plush toys or whatever. So in the show, the Mandalorian was kind of responsible for Grogu because he was trying to bring him to safety, and in the meantime, he was responsible for him. But now he takes him on missions into dangerous places. Like, why is he not somewhere in school, and in between missions then teaches him stuff and trains him or whatever, or teaches him whatever creed the Mandalorians have? You know what I mean? Like that would make sense. But Grogu just tagging along to dangerous bounties is just not realistic at all. Like, never mind realistic, it just makes no sense on a story character level at all. And then there's this pretension at a thematic thing where Din tries to be a parent and a mentor, and Grogu keeps trying to just push buttons, and he's a major nuisance. And Din kind of is just trying to manage him, trying to keep him from breaking stuff. And then at the end of the movie, they're sitting in the cockpit, and he allows Grogu to push the button. That feels like the end of a character arc, right? But it's like, I would say it's not. Just scattering a few lines into a movie, and then pointing towards that and say, hey, that's character development is not enough. You have to it has to infuse the entire movie and every action the character takes. And if that was the case where Grogu actually like grew and learned things and made decisions based on those lessons, so that he's a different person by the end than he was at the beginning, and Din in the beginning treats him like a child, and by the end has realized that Grogu is his own person now and is responsible for his own actions, and maybe needs some guidance, but doesn't need to be babysat anymore. That could have been a character arc, right? And that could have been about something. But I don't think that's really in here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And then you have the whole aspect of like his power ability of like, using the force. In the TV series, he's kind of like shown to like, I think he's like hold a ship or something like that in the TV series, if I remember correctly. But he's kind of like shown to like, be strong with the force. And of course, like in here as well, he kind of like helps Rudder out of the pit when he falls in. But then he kind of seems to do it effortlessly when he does kind of decide to tap into the force. And then it's like at all other points in the movie, it's like you're just kind of sat on the sideline. You're not doing anything. You're not like helping out in any way. You're just kind of almost like a bit of a liability for like the first part of the movie, really and truthfully, where the Mandalorian's just kind of doing his stuff and he just kind of has to like make sure like Grogu is okay. Even in like the opening sequence where like all the bombs are there and it's like, if you're really concerned about the bombs, just kind of use your force power.
I was going to say, just push them out into the air.
Yeah. But he doesn't.
With the force.
And that's the problem when you try to like save things for like, specific moments in the movie. It's like you save his force power for when he needs to like help the Mandalorian when he's been poisoned. So then you like try to like run this gag of like him trying to like put him in this like little like pit thing or whatever. And he keeps bumping in his head. And it's like you're obviously doing it effortlessly. And you saved his force ability for that so that you can have that moment where Grogu's then taking care of the Mandalorian. And like, the other part where at the end of the movie he needs to save like Rudder out of the pit because he's like falling in. But it's like you can't have that and then not have him use it in like situations where it's like more common sense, like more basic. Like he clearly understands that the bombs are a threat. Just use your ability. Like I don't know. It's really annoying when stuff like that happens.
He uses the force in one more situation, and that is when they're handing in the bounty and Ward is trying to recruit him for the next one. There's a bowl of snacks on the table, and Grogu uses the force to pull the bowl towards him, and Ward stops him.
Yeah, I remember that.
And again, like they can't make up their mind, right, about how much he can use the force, how strong he is, when he would use it, and what his connection to the force is. And that is because he's not a character. He's a toy. He's a prop. There's no personality there at all. And that kind of ties into the problem that nobody does anything interesting in this. So we have one character who can use the force, right? So you might think that he does interesting things with it or could have, and he just doesn't, right? Like there's the scene where I think it's on the cyberpunk moon where they try to break into a place and the door is locked and the Mandalorian can't get it open, and so Grogu climbs through a window and disappears, and you think, okay, what's he gonna do? In what way is he going to use his unique skills to get them in? And then he just opens the door and then they walk in, right? So that's like one of those areas where that's a hurdle that your characters are overcoming, and the only thing that your secondary main character is providing is that he's small. And that's the only thing you can think. Like there's another one where they're fighting the two big bodyguard droids that guard kind of the chamber where the twins are in the palace, and Grogu crawls into the robots and starts pulling wires, right? And that's probably the most creative thing he does all movie. So like this is just a symptom of how these characters have nothing going on. And given what we do know about them and the capabilities they do have, the movie never comes up with interesting and cool things for them to do. You can count, in a 2-hour movie, you can count the instances on one hand and have fingers left over. The only thing that I really show up for this for is like a cool action sequence. Like that's pretty much all I expect to get out of a movie like this. And they're not even giving us that. There was not one moment in this where I said, okay, some creativity and thought and effort went into this. No, it's all very by the numbers. It's all very obvious.
Yeah, and again, kind of when you're just like mentioning like the cool stuff, and it's like, you could probably try to find a creative way for the Mandalorian to kind of like solve his problems and like kind of like get out of a situation, like say for like when he's in the pit and he's like fighting that like, the big snake, for example, but he kind of has to rely on Grogu to save him and get him out of the pit by like blowing up the thing, as opposed to him using like all of his history and everything that he's like known and like understood to try to like get out of that situation. I was also very confused about that pit of water, because I'm very sure like parts of it were deep and parts of it were not. And I know that they had like the tree branches, but I don't know, it just didn't seem consistent.
That's because it's a video game level. It's not supposed to make sense. It's not a real place.
Yeah, true, basically.
Like literally breaking through the ceiling and falling into shallow water, and then there's a monster. Like the only thing that was missing was the health bar.
And didn't the monster like dive under the water as well, like they would in like a video game? Mm-hmm. Like basically just.
And there's a weapon there. Like there's just a spear lying around. He just picks it up and fights the monster.
Sorry, wasn't that from the other monsters? And again, like when you say video game levels, he like defeats like the smaller monsters in that layer, and I think that's where he gets one of the weapons, and then the big one comes out, and then you have like that whole like pose moment where like the thing is like kind of like sits for a photo op opportunity before deciding to attack the Mandalorian. I think that was just like yeah. The more you say, the more it gives video gamey.
Yeah, and it's maybe that the spear came from like one of the guards or something, but I don't think so. I think it's just kind of lying there, but it doesn't really matter either way. So like it's just all very empty, very tired, right? Like I think that's kind of like I'm kind of struggling to say things about this movie because everything comes back to there's zero thought and creativity in this. It's purely like rearranging pieces that you recognize, and it feels kind of Star Warsy. 2 years ago we did this Have You Seen series where we talk about like where we showed Jonathan the Star Wars movies for the first time and kind of got his reactions in sequence, like all 9 main movies. And one of the things I said in that was, I don't think the people making Star Wars understand Star Wars. Like they don't understand why it works, because like especially the original trilogy, but also the prequels a little bit. Like those are still bad movies, but mostly because of they're made poorly, not because the ideas in them are bad. But there's a certain recipe for a Star Wars movie. Like it has to do with you put a character on a hero's journey, you motivate the hero's journey with a big political backdrop. Like for Luke that was Empire versus Rebellion. For Anakin it was Republic versus Separatists, right? And then you have them go to meet people, develop their skills, go to exotic places, learn lessons, grow until they finally defeat the big bad guy. Eventually, kind of. That's kind of the basic formula of how Star Wars uses the hero's journey. And in between, all the little details like the TIE fighters, the lightsabers, the X-Wings, the Force, all of that are little pieces that tell you things about the world and about what the story is about, and they inform who the main character is and who the hero is and why they do what they do and why they learn the lessons they do and so on, right? So like one of the examples of this was there's a reason why X-Wings can go to light speed and TIE fighters can't. It's because X-Wings are used by the good guys, and the good guys are all about individuals coming together for a common cause, versus TIE fighters are about top-down control and executing the will of an authority. And that is why those two different types of ships work differently. So you don't need to get this to enjoy Star Wars, but it is much richer, and it feels much more alive and much more rewarding to engage with if there's stuff in there, like where all these little trappings and all these little details say things about the world and about the characters and about what's going on. And that is completely missing here, right? That was also missing in the sequel trilogy, where it's all like that kind of started the trend of just recycle images people recognize. But none of it was deliberate, and here it's even less so. Here, nothing you're seeing says anything about anything, right? Like I don't think it even says anything that the Hutts use kind of repurposed separatist droids. Aren't they just crime lords that have people working for them? You know what I mean? Like what does it say about the Hutts that they use droids exclusively? And I think it's just there because Dave Filoni likes the prequels and he likes the droid army, so he's going to put some in his movie. The Mandalorian basically fights 2 kinds of enemies in this. Droids fighting for the Hutts, and stormtroopers fighting for this warlord guy. And that's it. Like, there's nothing new here, and there's nothing specific. Like, yes, the warlord is trying to bring back the Empire, but that's about it. Like, that's like it doesn't say anything about who he is and how he runs things and what he wants and that sort of thing.
And I don't know whether it's just a me thing, because I'm not like too deep into the timeline, but I don't think there was like anything in this that kind of really like told me what the timeline was for where this fits in. And I think that actually might just be more of a me thing, but I don't know, I didn't kind of come away from this movie like really knowing, okay, like this is where it fits in the chronological story of Star Wars at all.
This is a prequel to the sequels.
A prequel to the Rey and Finn and Poe movies.
In the opening, they say it's a few years after the fall of the Empire. So they don't say how many years, but call it 6-7 years, something like that.
I did miss the opening scroll. I got in there just after that.
So they do say, like, it's a few years since the Empire fell and the Republic is trying to rebuild, and it's messy, and there's warlords rising, and there's like Imperial remnants lying around, and that is why you have all of that's why you have this guy trying to be a new emperor when he's really just a petty bandit, that sort of thing. So not a terrible setup for a story at all, or for a status quo. But number one, it's completely obvious. Number two, the story is not about this, right? Like that is not the motivating factor for what Din Djarin does and why he does it, in the way that Luke and Anakin were shaped by the political backdrop of the galaxy. That's one of the problems with it. And what is kind of interesting about this is that this is retconning the sequel trilogy, right? Like, this is supposed to be the new start in a way, right? Like, this is supposed to be what Star Wars is going to be like from now on. And it doesn't go past Rise of Skywalker. It picks up a few years after Return of the Jedi, and it basically does what people were expecting 10 years ago from The Force Awakens. Because if you were kind of like reading like the novels and the comics and playing the games before 2014, this is kind of the status quo that people knew about Star Wars Galaxy, and then The Force Awakens comes along and replaces it with something less interesting. And so this is going back to the previous status quo, basically making that canonical, and it doesn't quite rule, like the First Order can still exist, but they're not going into the future. They are picking up shortly after the last thing that people liked and trying to create something new in its place. And they're not doing a lot of, like, they're not adding a lot of detail, but things like the Republic, like the Hutt space being independent and the Republic having to work with them, like that's kind of the beginning of a status quo, right? Like the original trilogy didn't have that much more detail than that either, but it kind of gave you a sense of what the galaxy was like. And I think it's kind of just interesting that 10 years after the sequel trilogy, they are basically just like soft retconning it out, in that they are just replacing it with something different. And there's no sense of, this is where the sequels led us, and this is what happens next. This is entirely about, we have to kind of create a new status quo for the Star Wars galaxy, and nobody liked what we did in the sequels, so we're just gonna start over and not tell anybody. That's kind of interesting.
Well, we'll kind of have to see with that, with the upcoming movies, I guess, and what comes after this. It would partly make sense for them to kind of retcon it, just with like how disastrous everything went with the sequel trilogy. But I don't have enough faith that what they're going to replace it with is going to be anything better than what we already got.
Yeah, like this is the wrong movie to do it, right? Because it doesn't come out with like a big idea of this is the big new journey. They probably should have picked a main character who actually has like charisma and a pulse, right? Because the Mandalorian doesn't. He purely coasts on people like Pedro Pascal, and people think the Mandalorian armor looks cool. And that's the only thing Din Djarin has going for him. Who exactly is really invested in where the Mandalorian is going and how his story will turn out? Because I'm not, and I don't know that many people who are.
I don't even think I'm even invested with like how Grogu's story plays out, because doesn't he age like incredibly slowly? So it's just like, how long are we going to do this whole Baby Yoda gimmick with him?
Forever.
At least with Marvel, when they did sort of Baby Groot, they kind of like quickly phased him out of that and put him into teenage Groot and like aged him, like looked to age him up again. They had their moment with Baby Groot. He was cute, fun, a little bit silly in the movies. They had like their little gags from it, and then just quickly kind of moved past it and didn't kind of like wallow in it too long. And I think they're a little bit stuck here with Baby Yoda.
Yeah, and they can't change him, right? Because teenage Yoda is not gonna move toys, right? Like they could turn him into some kind of Anakin character where he has all of this potential, but maybe didn't have the best influences, or maybe like a teenage Grogu could kind of start to drift away from Din, and Din then tries to be a better parent or a better mentor or something. I don't know. Like there's stories there you could tell, but I don't know that anybody is interested in telling them.
Whatever you had planned for Mandalorian and Grogu, just scrap it, go back to the drawing board. And like we've said this so many times with Star Wars, just give us something new. Like just go to the future, go to a different time period. Like being stuck, just give us something new and something exciting to kind of look forward to.
Yeah, and just go for, like, I don't even think you have to go like 1,000 years into the future or anything like that. You don't have to burn all bridges. Like I've said for a while now that the sequel trilogy is a pile of nothing. So you can just move forward 20 years and just say, well, there was like this First Order thing that kind of tried to bring the Empire back, and then there were heroes that defeated them. But now we are like the next generation, and the Republic is established, and here's the status quo, and here's the new threat, the new challenge to the Republic. Go. Like, and then come up with a few characters that kind of embody that conflict and that have interesting things going on, and that actually are like awake and stuff, whose journey we then want to follow. And that would be how you fix Star Wars. Just go forward in time, leave the stuff in the past behind you. It's not that hard, I don't think. It's honestly baffling that this is so difficult. And I think this is entirely driven by commercial concerns, that they are terrified of actually moving on to something new. Because if you don't have Jedi and rebels and TIE fighters and stormtroopers and Hutts and all of that stuff in your Star Wars movie, people will not show up. They will not show up to something that is just different. And it's not hard to come up with something, but it's such a massive gamble that you cannot risk your career on being the person who made Star Wars, like who killed Star Wars, because you made the decision that killed people's motivation for showing up. The problem is they're doing exactly that by spinning their wheels for 10 years, right? Like after 10 years, who exactly has the patience to wait for them to get their act together and actually find a story to tell? I'm probably more invested than most people, but I'm like, I did not expect anything from this movie, and that's exactly what I got. And that's why this is not a rant. This is more an observation about, look how empty Star Wars is now. People have been saying this since The Last Jedi, that you cannot tell new stories. Like Star Wars is a one-story universe and whatever. And I never thought that was true. The problem has always been that the people in charge refuse to tell those stories because for strategic reasons, it is too risky to do so. And I think that is the real problem with Star Wars.
Like you said, this is less a rant and just kind of more. And I actually think we spent more time actually trying to look to the future of Star Wars. And I think that kind of like just like embodies it, is that, you know, we got this new movie and we're like, okay, but can you go somewhere else with this? Can we like not see the same things over and over again? Can there be like some type of development in the world that you're kind of showing us, as opposed to like the same things over and over again? And I think that's pretty damning on both the movie itself that's just come out, with kind of how empty it is, and to just like Star Wars as a whole. All we can really like kind of like pull from this is, why can't you go forward and do something more or do something different?
Yep. Any other observations about Star Wars, The Mandalorian, and Grogu?
No, man. 20 to 25 minutes too long, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about how this whole third act is tacked on, and Grogu's whole thing in the forest and all of that. It felt like a different movie.
Honestly, like this whole thing of like him, I was like rolling my eyes so hard at it, and I know it's meant to be like a cute moment where like he's like, you know, camouflaging him and like looking after him and this and the other. I was just like rolling my eyes. I was like, what are we doing here? It felt like drastically different to sort of what had come before. I get people that say like it feels like, you know, multiple different episodes, because like at the start you're doing like this like bounty hunt for like this guy that's just meant to be like very little information about him, like, you know, very difficult to reach. And then within like, you know, first part of the movie, we find him, we capture him, we deliver him to the Republic, and I don't think that goes anywhere. So no else after that. And then you then have like this whole like Jabba experience and stuff like that. And then you have like this like, I call it a filler episode of like Grogu healing up like Mandalorian and stuff. And it just kind of like goes from like one thing to the next. And at no point did I have fun with any of it.
And it's like they don't understand that a movie has like a story that it needs to tell. Where like just to take this idea of Din being injured and poisoned and Grogu nursing him back to health, how does it fit into like their character journeys and like their stories, right? Does Din need to learn a lesson about underestimating his enemies? Does Grogu need to learn a lesson about growing up and stepping up? You know, any of that. Is that in any way related to what the movie's about? And I would say no. I would say it's just stuff that happens. And if this was, like you said, if this was a series, you could have kind of like a breather episode where they're kind of recovering from the big fight and you get some big character moments, whatever. But first of all, in a movie, it just works differently. You just cannot pace things like that, right? It has to be a little bit more linear in that it's like a progression that goes from the first step to the last step in 100 minutes or so. And you can't just take half an hour in the middle where characters just are sleeping. It just doesn't work. Like, that's not how you make a movie. It looked a lot like, a cutscene from a video game, right? Like, you have two big fights, and in between there's like a 2-minute cutscene where you kind of show kind of how much the fight took out of him, and we have a little character moment where one character cares for another and whatever. And then you move on to the next fight scene. Like, that's how you would pace it and structure it in a video game again. And that's kind of how it is here. And again, it just it convinces me that this was written by people who don't know how stories work and how movies work. But they're kind of, for some reason, in charge of making movies, right? And I think that is kind of a big problem.
So guess what? Last thoughts?
Yeah. So overall, I'm not even disappointed. Like, this is just nothing. Like, there's no character here, there's no story here, there's not even a lot of excitement here. It's all just flashy lights on screen that don't mean very much. And the few attempts to inject meaning into this are very clumsy, very half-hearted, very isolated from the broader story. And as a result, nothing means anything. And because nothing means anything, it's hard to care. And because it's hard to care, it's boring. So this is not the way out of 5.
Yeah, for me, it's very frustrating when it's such a beautiful day out and I'm like in the cinema having to watch Mandalorian and Grogu, and you kind of serve me up a whole bunch of nothing for 2 hours and 12 minutes. It's always a bad time when partway through I'm checking like, you know, what the runtime is for the movie. But yeah, this was just very forgettable. Like, I will very much forget this. Like, we'll probably do the end of year like review, and I've probably forgotten that I'd watched this movie. Like, there was just like literally very little to it, unfortunately. So with that, I'll give it a 3 out of 10, if I'm honest.
And it won't even appear on either the best or the worst of the year. It'll just be fine. Like, it's not even fine. It doesn't even rise to the level of fine. It's just there. And I certainly am not interested in seeing it again. And those are the worst, almost the worst movies, because they didn't get any emotional response out of you at all. Like, this, like, even like I've gotten more enjoyment out of the sequel movies, because there you could engage with them and kind of try to understand what people were thinking and what went wrong and what could have been and why it is the way it is and all of that. And that's not even like we struggle to fill the hour here, right? Because there's just that little there.
Yeah, literally. Normally we'll kind of touch on like themes and like, you know, character journeys, character arcs and this and the other. But yeah, there's nothing to be discussed here. So
yeah, that requires that stuff is in the movie and it's just done poorly. And this movie doesn't rise to that level.
I guess with that, we reach the end of today's episode. As always, if you reach this part of the episode, we appreciate you pressing play, giving us a listen, and just generally checking us out. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, then you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a whole bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eitherstone Podcast.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.